the majority of people actually believe that if you win the elections, the primary and the caucuses, then you should be the nominee, that the party elites and the superdelegates aren't allowed to take the nomination away from you. But if you look at the Republican Party, 1912, it was a huge deal because supposedly Theodore Roosevelt and William Taft split the party, allowed the Democrat to come in. Well, this is very fucked up because Woodrow Wilson, the biggest piece of shit president on the face of the, out of all of them, he is the fucking worst. He's a conservative, okay? And he also invaded Haiti, invaded Mexico, went into World War I just for imperialistic fucking reasons. And so the 1912 presidential election was actually pretty spectacular. You also had Eugene Debs, you had Taft, you had Roosevelt, and you had Woodrow Wilson. But I want to mention that the Republican primary, the Republican primary, the nomination to get the Republican nod was very tumultuous. Teddy Roosevelt called William Howard Taft a fathead. Hey, you fucking fathead. You got the brains of a guinea pig. And so there was some name calling that was going on in 1912. So what was Teddy Roosevelt's deal? He's bucking his own party, so what the fuck is going on? Well, Roosevelt had actually got to become president because William McKinley was assassinated. So he went ahead and served William McKinley's term out, and then he ran another time and easily won the presidency, but that was sort of his 2 terms. He finished the 1 term out, and then he, did the other person's term. Well, that's 2 terms is what you're allowed to have. So he's like, well, I could run. That's absolutely the truth. If, we're only allowed, now it's an amendment that you can't do, but more it was just about Teddy Roosevelt keeping his word, and it was about custom. So Washington stepped down after 2 terms, so everybody else is supposed to step down after 2 terms. But that's Teddy Roosevelt didn't actually have his own term, so therefore he was eligible, but he had promised that he wouldn't because that isn't what he was trying to do. So he left office in 1909. He chose Taft, which was the Secretary of War under Roosevelt, to succeed him as president. And so Taft easily won the 1908 presidential election. But Roosevelt fucking was disappointed with Taft. His conservative policies. Taft upset Roosevelt when he used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up U.S. Steel. Teddy Roosevelt approved the J.P. Morgan-owned U.S. Steel as a good trust. So that was one of the issues that had. So Robert La Follette. Robert La Follette was also in the 1920 primaries. But Robert La Follette versus Taft versus Roosevelt. So it was actually a 3-horse race for the nomination, for the Republican nomination. And I want to point out, this is just amazing. So Teddy Roosevelt, during the election, Teddy Roosevelt actually wins more electoral votes. Teddy Roosevelt won more primaries and caucuses of the Republican Party. Teddy Roosevelt would have won the Republican nomination if his delegates didn't abstain from voting because they were all butthurt over some other delegates that had been seated, probably, shystily, right, fucking illegal or whatever, bullshitly. They was like, oh, we don't want those 2 guys sitting over there. They don't get a right to vote, so therefore us 300 aren't going to vote. Well, that means Teddy Roosevelt didn't get the Republican nomination when he could have got it. The Republican nomination was held in the Chicago Coliseum in, 1912, I don't know, June or so. It was June 18th to June 22nd. Now, the detailed results, how many delegates voted for how many, William Howard Taft got 302 votes, Theodore Roosevelt got 107, and then Robert La Follette got 36. So 302 beats 107, right, by almost 200 votes. But the Roosevelt delegates that abstained was 322. So 322 plus 107 is 429. 429 beats 302. Therefore, Teddy Roosevelt could have got the Republican nomination if his delegates would have voted. Now, if you believe Donald Trump, if you believe Bernie Sanders, if you win the state, then the superdelegates should vote for you. If you win the majority of the states, then you should look at this map, this electoral map of the Republican Party primaries. They only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 states that had voted. So 13 states that had primaries. The first time the Republican Party did primaries was in 1912. And you look at all the states that Roosevelt won. He won Oregon, he won California, he won South Dakota, he won Nebraska, he won Illinois, he won Ohio, he won Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and New Jersey. So he won 9 of the states, and a lot of them were overwhelming landslides. So he won 9 states. William Taft won 2 states. Robert La Follette won 2 states. So William Howard Taft was actually in terms of the states that were won, Robert La Follette won just as many. So Robert La Follette was just as strong of a candidate as William Howard Taft. Taft was a very weak candidate just because he was. Take a look at the first presidential preference primary. It was held in North Dakota, March 19th. So this is Taft, La Follette, and Teddy. So Taft was leading in the delegate count with 127 to 10 for his challengers. Okay, good. He's winning in the delegate count, but that has nothing to do with the primary. On the primary day, voters braved the cold rain in North Dakota, and they give the first official presidential primary for the Republican Party to Robert La Follette. Robert La Follette. So you want to talk about New Hampshire and Iowa. The New Hampshire and Iowa back in the Republican days was the fucking North Dakota, and North Dakota give their nomination to La Follette. And so it was almost exclusive of Roosevelt versus La Follette race. La Follette had 57%, Roosevelt had 40%, and Taft had 3%. 3%. Parallels for how they're actually doing, the primary in 1912 for the Republican Party is absolutely amazing. I was on the Nader campaign, and I was a Nader supporter before I was on the campaign. But people want to say, well, Nader stole the election. Nader stole the election because he got 3% of the vote. So if that's the case, then Taft stole the election away from Roosevelt in the North Dakota primary. The President Taft stole the election away from Teddy Roosevelt. Or La Follette stole the election from Roosevelt and Taft, right? Who the hell is this La Follette guy thinking he could just jump in and steal elections? Or we could just say every person gains whatever votes they can gain, and it's an election, so it's a horse race. So c'est la vie. Unfortunately, or actually fortunately, I think it's a good thing that sometimes smaller candidates can take enough votes from either one of them to get the bigger candidates to issue a list of 10 things that Al Gore could have stood for. Progressive, democratic things, like Bernie Sanders types of things, universal health care and other issues like that. But instead of trying to run as a liberal, he ran as a conservative. And every time you do that, you'll lose. The voters would rather an authentic Republican than a fake Republican. You want to pretend that you're more conservative than the Republican? Sometimes Americans want liberals, sometimes they want conservatives. So I wanted to finish this off because this is remarkable. Taft eventually wins in New York, but the New York Times reported that Taft had won 134 out of 170 delegates chosen nationwide. So the New York Times were reporting the delegate count right before the election, just like they do now. They're trying to have this narrative that was saying, well, Taft has all the delegates, so fuck it, he's already won. Who gives a shit about the election of New York? Well, first you had the North Dakota race, and La Follette won the North Dakota race. Then you had New York, and this is this is Teddy Roosevelt's home state. So, and he lost that. So Teddy lost, North Dakota. Teddy lost New York. And they said that the New York Republicans overwhelmingly voted for Taft by a 2-to-1 margin. New York City gave Taft nearly 70% of the vote there. It was a stunning repudiation of Teddy in his home state and his second loss in the first 2 presidential primaries. So then Roosevelt changed his strategy following his New York debacle. He issued an ultimatum to Republicans on March 28 to nominate him or he would run as an independent. That's just like fucking Trump, and that's actually a good card to use. Bernie Sanders has already said that he would not run as an independent, which is to make him look like a strong Democrat. But if he loses, what's he going to do? Run as an independent or tell us to vote for Hillary? I can't go back to the first Republican primary, which was a dozen states or so not even all 50 states. But out of the dozen states, Teddy Roosevelt just beat the shit out of Taft and, beat La Follette too. And so he was the stronger candidate. He was the stronger candidate because he won more states. He won more you know, more of the whatever primaries, caucuses, and he even had more delegates, but they had abstained. So his delegate count was more, his primary count was more, and then the general election, he had he won 6 states, won 88 electoral votes. Taft won 2 states and won 8 electoral votes. So Teddy Roosevelt was a stronger candidate even in the presidential election. So, and then Eugene Debs, he got 6% of the vote, 0 states, 0 electoral votes. Did he steal the election? Was it Debs that did it? Get the fuck out of here. This is a fun election. This was exciting. In terms of the popular vote, Teddy Roosevelt got 27.4%, Taft got 23.2%. So again, Teddy Roosevelt is clearly the stronger candidate, stronger person that the Republican Party should have nominated. Maybe it just wasn't precedented. It was a weird fucking year, okay? Just like 2016 is a weird fucking year. But 2012, if the idea is, could you give the nomination to another person that wasn't the president? Taft had the fucking office. He was sitting in the presidency. But perhaps Teddy Roosevelt was sounding the alarm saying that Taft is going to lose against Woodrow Wilson. You need to vote for Teddy if you still want a Republican in office. But Taft wanted to hold on to the presidential power. But he won the majority. I mean, he won 27.4% to 23.2%, so he had the percentage. More people voted for him. He had 6 states to his 2, and he won 88 electoral votes to Taft's 8. In addition, Roosevelt won all those primaries, okay? He hasn't won any yet so far. You know, he lost North Dakota. Robert La Follette beat him, and then he lost New York. Taft beat him there. So, oh no, that looks bad for Teddy, right? And then Wisconsin is the 3rd state that voted, and guess who they voted for? They voted for La Follette, but they didn't have Teddy Roosevelt's name on the ballot. So he got a few of the write-in votes, but La Follette got 73%, Taft got 26%. Why did Wisconsin not put, you know, I don't know. It was La Follette's state, wasn't it? His home state of Wisconsin. So La Follette won his home state, and he beat the shit out of Taft by a 73 to 26% margin. So again, Robert La Follette is stronger than Taft by overwhelming margins in North Dakota and Wisconsin. So maybe Robert La Follette could have been the candidate. Why do we got to go with the presumptive nominee? William Taft is president, so let's just go with the presumptive nominee. Well, I don't like the type of fucking way. Eventually, Teddy Roosevelt wins Illinois. He lost the first 3 primary elections, but then on April 9th, 1912 in Illinois, he won that state 61.1% over Taft's 29.2% and Robert La Follette 9.8%. So he beat the shit out of Taft. Roosevelt won every county in Illinois. So then you go on, and then you just see that, you know, 59.7%, Teddy Roosevelt wins in Pennsylvania. 58.7%, Teddy wins in Nebraska. 40.2% he wins in Oregon, and that's a 3-horse race, so Oregon won. 31.3 was Robert La Follette, 28.5 was William Howard Taft. Massachusetts wound up going for Taft, but just barely, 50 to 48%. Maryland, Teddy wins Maryland, 53%. Teddy wins California, 55%. Teddy wins Ohio. Teddy wins Ohio by 55%, then Teddy wins New Jersey 56%, and then South Dakota wins 55%. And some of these margins were even, you know, starker because Taft only won 30% in South Dakota versus Teddy's 55%. So by, you know, just their own primary, by the Republicans' own primary, Teddy Roosevelt had won 9 of the 12 competitions. Robert La Follette won the other 2, and Taft won 2. Okay, maybe there's 13. So 13 total states, right? So Robert La Follette won 2, William Howard Taft won 2, Theodore Roosevelt wins 9. 9. And he crushed, you know, he crushed. Maybe not as much as La Follette did in Wisconsin, but 61%. I mean, that's in politics, that's 61% to 29% is a landslide. So Teddy Roosevelt was a stronger candidate in the primary, stronger candidate in the presidential election. I'll mention this very last thing, that Howard Hughes or William Hughes, I don't know, the hip-hop Hughes, he was talking about, he has a broker convention thing, and he had talked about how he doesn't see any benefits to a broker convention. I absolutely disagree. This is exciting shit. Donald Trump wins the fucking nomination. I've heard some Democrats are like, I hope they steal from him. Okay, so for the next 2 months, you want to hear Donald Trump sitting there shit and all this argument and stuff, and then he goes to the convention in Cleveland. So for the next 3 fucking months, we're going to hear fucking Cruz and Trump and goddamn Kasich's fucking mouth. That's what you want. Because you hate Trump so much, you'd rather Kasich get in the fuck. No, of course not. That's not what you're saying. You just want to see Trump have a fucking bad day because you're, you know, it's bad strategy because the Republicans have a record turnout rate. There's millions more new voters, and it's exciting. It's energizing. I saw it in Kentucky last year. The Republicans increased voter turnout rate and won the governor. Just to recap it a little bit better, you don't want that. You don't want this to go to, if you're a Democrat who wants Bernie Sanders to win, you don't want this to go to the Republican convention. You don't want Donald Trump to be ripped of the fucking nomination. Give it to Donald, shut the fuck up, and then let's just focus on the Democrat race, okay? But now I have to fucking focus on, I didn't want to pay attention. I did not want to fucking see what the hell the Republicans were doing. Now I have to. Next 3 months, I mean, it's April, May, June, July, and then what, August, September, October, November. So the convention is 4 months out from the election. So this is exciting shit. They're waiting till the last fucking second to figure out what the hell is going on. Maybe something else will be figured out that would be good for the Democrats. If the Republicans want to win, take this to the convention, and it'll be exciting. It might turn into fist fights like the 1924 Clan-Bake Democratic National Convention. And that's exciting. People say, well, that looks bad and it looks dirty. Yeah, it is. Politics is fucking dirty. That's how it is. But it in turns